The carpet was red. Unlike the movies, this one was older, worn at the seams, and faded where too many heels had passed. But it still tried to be glamorous. The chandeliers above hummed low, bathing the lobby in gold light. A string quartet played softly behind a velvet curtain. And she was there. A black woman stood at the threshold of a ballroom with the name she once carried like a badge. Carter. Above the double doors, gold-embossed letters shimmered. Congratulations, Principal Richard Carter. 40 years of excellence. She let the words hang there, a proclamation, a performance, a carefully polished lie. Inside they were clapping, toasting, telling stories about a man they thought they knew. A man she used to call Dad. She hadn't come to ruin the party. That would have been easy. Too easy. She came because silence had protected him long enough. Because no one ever questioned the version of the story he told. Because 10 years ago he said, "She ran away." She left a hateful note. She's never coming back. And now, she was back. And she wasn't alone. In her coat pocket was an envelope, yellowed with time, folded at the center. Her handwriting in blue ink, slanted, careful, almost trembling. The real note, the one he hid. She looked at her reflection in the glass door. Same jawline he used to point out at family dinners. That's the Carter bone structure. Same eyes he once called sharp enough to cut through nonsense. Now? Those eyes looked back at her like they didn't recognize what they saw. She adjusted her blazer. The envelope rustled inside her coat. Somewhere inside, the band began to play jazz. Her cue. She stepped forward, one heel, then the other. The doors opened without resistance. Conversations paused. Forks hovered midair. Smiles faltered, just slightly, as if someone had dimmed the lights without touching the switch. Eyes turned, one by one. Curious at first, then uncertain, then stunned. She didn't rush, didn't flinch, didn't smile. She moved through the space like she belonged to it. Because once, she did. Because once, her photo had been on those walls too. The posters lined the ballroom like trophies of memory. Group shots of graduating classes, gold plaques beside high-achieving students, tightly cropped photos of her father standing beside senators, superintendents, and scholarship winners. There he was, Principal Richard Carter, mid-handshake, teeth-white smile, eyes locked on the camera like it was another audience to impress. And beside the image, the real man stood. Same posture, same navy suit, same curated charm. Only now, cracking at the corners. The applause had ended minutes ago. Faded awkwardly, not like thunder retreating, but like someone slowly turning down the volume on a song they no longer liked. But his hand still rested on the microphone, tightly, knuckles pale against the polished black stem, as if letting go of it would be a declaration, a surrender, a signal that the room had truly turned. He didn't speak, didn't smile again, didn't adjust his tie like he usually did after a big speech. He just held on, like maybe if he stood still long enough, if he didn't move, didn't breathe wrong, the applause might come back, the respect, the power, the version of himself he'd spent 4 decades constructing. But no one was clapping now. Not anymore. They weren't looking at him like a legend. They weren't waiting for his next line. They were watching her. Evelyn didn't speak yet. She didn't need to. Her presence was louder than any standing ovation. And he could feel it. The shift. The spotlight drifted away from him. Not because she stole it, but because the truth called it elsewhere. For the first time in that room, he wasn't the story. He swallowed. Hard. His Adam's apple jumped like a nervous tick. His free hand went to adjust his cufflink, then dropped. He realized what everyone else was about to. That he'd built a legacy not on stone, but on silence. And silence, when cracked, doesn't hold. Evelyn finally stepped into the center light, and only then did his fingers leave the microphone. But it was too late. She passed table after table, a quiet procession. Some guests shifted in their chairs, eyes darting between her and the stage, unsure of whether to say something, whether to stand or stay seated. Others simply stared, trying to connect this composed woman with the rumor that had floated around town a decade ago. She ran away. She had issues. She joined a cult. She disappeared. But this wasn't a ghost. She wasn't translucent. She was solid, in heels and dark wool, with a calm that felt louder than any microphone. Her father didn't move. Not at first, but his smile, now the one that had anchored dozens of speeches, soothed anxious parents, charmed school board donors, had vanished completely. What replaced it wasn't anger. It was fear, not of her, but of the story she was about to tell. Because he knew something that no one else in the room did. Yet. He knew exactly what she had in her coat pocket. She stopped just shy of the stage, not quite on it, not quite beneath it, just close enough to see both versions of him, the one captured in a photo and the one still holding the room like it belonged to him. Above her, projected large and gleaming, was his favorite version of himself, mid-handshake with a senator, perfect posture, eyes locked on the camera, smile wide, but not too wide, calculated, confident, clean, the image of a man who always knew exactly how he wanted to be seen, and for years he'd made sure that was what everyone saw. Then her gaze shifted, down, to him, the real one, flesh and blood, suit and sweat, posture now just a little too stiff, like it had been holding too much for too long, a man who looked almost smaller in person, because he was no longer surrounded by applause, because the myth had lifted, just slightly, and left behind someone painfully human. And in that single glance, the kind that takes no more than 3 seconds but contains a lifetime, she saw it. The photo showed a legacy. The man showed the lie that built it. The difference was unmistakable. One was curated, the other was cracked. And as she stepped toward the microphone, Evelyn didn't feel power, didn't feel rage. She felt clarity, the kind that's sharp enough to cut glass, because some truths don't need to be shouted, they just need to be seen. And for the first time in 10 years, he was the one who couldn't find the words. The man who built a career from speeches, who dazzled donors and disciplined students with the same sharp tongue, who had an answer for every failure, a phrase for every praise, now had nothing. No script, no spin, no pre-approved narrative to fall back on. Just an open mic, a waiting room, and a daughter with receipts. His lips parted once, closed, opened again, but no sound came, not even a breath to pretend he had control. Because what do you say when the truth walks in wearing heels and holding the letter you pretended never existed? What do you say when the version of her you buried learns how to resurrect herself? What do you say when the silence you weaponized turns around and stares you in the face? She had lived a decade trying to fill the silence he left. Now he stood in it, trapped in it, swallowed by the very absence he once used to erase her, and it was so loud, that silence, louder than applause, louder than speeches, louder than anything he might have said if he'd found the words in time, but he didn't, and the silence wasn't hers anymore. It was his. He saw her before anyone else did. Across the ballroom, through the crowd, between laughter and flutes and the quiet hush of polished silverware, he saw her, and in that instant something broke. Not out loud, not visibly, but it broke. His smile, the one he wore like armor, polished through years of handshakes and headlines, fell without ceremony. His hands, once mid-gesture, froze mid-air before dropping to his sides. His spine straightened, not in pride, but in reflex. The way a soldier tightens at the sight of something long buried, suddenly marching back into the daylight. Their eyes met. She didn't blink, didn't look away, didn't smile like someone who'd come to make peace. But she did smile. Software, controlled, measured like a blade laid gently across the table. Not cruel, not warm, just enough to say, "Yes, I'm here. Yes, I remember everything." And in that half second, that blinkless, breathless moment, she saw it. Recognition, fear, and something else. Not regret. Never regret. But the panicked calculation of a man realizing that the story he'd spent 10 years rehearsing was no longer the only one in the room. She stepped closer, not fast, not slow, just inevitable. Every step she took toward him was a subtraction of his certainty, of his version, of his ability to control what happened next. And as she approached the microphone, she didn't need to clear her throat. She didn't need to raise her voice. Because truth, real truth, doesn't need volume. It only needs timing. There was a time he'd called her his pride and joy. At fundraisers, school board meetings, and the winter concerts. He'd beam when introducing her. "This is my daughter, Evelyn, class president, honor roll, future lawyer, maybe Harvard if they're lucky." She used to believe him. Used to believe his pride was real, that his love was earned through achievement, that if she followed the rules, she'd be safe in his story. Until the day she broke the script, until the day she wrote a different future for herself, and he wrote her out of his. Now she stood, not as the daughter of Richard Carter, but as the truth he buried. He gave her no microphone, no welcome, just a whisper as she approached the podium. "Evelyn, not here." But she was already reaching into her coat, her voice calm, clear. "Hi, my name is Evelyn Carter. I'm his daughter." The room turned electric, gasps, chairs shifted, wine glasses trembled in midair. In that moment, before she said anything more, she could already feel the shift. Not power, not revenge, clarity, the kind that only comes when you've spent a decade in silence, the kind that makes truth echo louder than any applause. There was a time when being Richard Carter's daughter felt like wearing a crown. At Carter High, the school that bore his name, everyone knew who Evelyn was. She's the principal's kid. Honor roll, student council, national merit. Mr. Carter says she's headed to Yale, or maybe Georgetown. She heard it in the hallways, in the break room at staff events, even whispered by teachers who smiled too wide when they saw her coming. He walked the school with a clipboard in one hand and Evelyn in the other, a living resume. "That's my girl," he'd say proudly. "Future lawyer, debate team champ, first chair flute, maybe Harvard if they're lucky." She wasn't a daughter. She was proof. Proof that he could raise excellence. Proof that he knew how to build legacies, not just curricula. Proof that his version of family values wasn't just a speech at board meetings. It walked, talked, and aced her AP exams. And for a while, Evelyn wore that role like it fit, like it was hers. She remembers the rules, though they were never written. Grades had to be straight A's. Meetings couldn't be skipped, not for sleep, not for sickness. Smiles had to be polished. Tears had to be private, and never ever make Richard Carter look like a fool. One time she got a B+ on a calculus test. When she brought it home, he didn't yell, didn't scold. He just stared at it, then at her, and said, "You're slipping. People will notice." The disappointment in his voice cut sharper than any punishment. By the time she turned 17, she had mastered the performance. She didn't cry when overwhelmed. She didn't question when exhausted. She didn't speak unless she knew her answer was the best in the room. And when she couldn't breathe, she wrote, quietly, in secret, little monologues, scene fragments, stories about daughters who didn't fit into the neat little boxes, about mothers who watched but didn't speak, about girls who ran. One afternoon, her drama teacher, Mrs. Finch, saw one of those scripts left behind after rehearsal. She didn't say anything then. 3 weeks later, Evelyn received a letter at Juilliard. Full scholarship, summer intensive, 1 in 10 nationwide. She held it in shaking hands for 2 days, folded and unfolded it like a sacred text. She waited for the right moment. It came on a Wednesday night. Spaghetti night. The only night of the week her father wasn't working late. They sat across from each other, the TV muted in the background. "It's theater," she said softly. "But it's serious. This is real. This is what I want." He didn't look up from his fork. "I didn't raise you to chase dreams." He stood, took his plate to the sink, and walked out. No fight, no debate, just silence. But not the kind that heals. Not the quiet that follows understanding. Not the stillness that comes after a storm. This was something else. This was cold, calculated, surgical. The kind of silence that doesn't slam doors. It simply removes them. He didn't yell, didn't argue, didn't say no, or not yet, or even, "I don't understand." He just got up from the table, took his plate to the sink, and walked out of the room. Like her dreams weren't real enough to require a response. Like she wasn't real enough anymore. There was no explosion, no shouting match to look back on, no line that was crossed, no moment she could circle and say, "There." That's when it all fell apart. Just silence. And somehow that was worse, because silence is hard to explain. Silence doesn't bruise. It doesn't show up on transcripts. It doesn't make a sound when it carves itself into you, but it does leave something behind. A scar. Invisible but deep. She sat at the table for a long time after he left, long after the spaghetti had gone cold, long after the last note of courage drained from her chest. She didn't cry. She just sat there trying to understand how fast love can become a wall. From that night on, she stopped being a daughter. Not because she wanted to, but because he no longer looked at her like one. He didn't ask how her day went. Didn't remind her to eat before rehearsal. Didn't say goodnight. He didn't punish her. He just deleted her. Erased the version of her that dreamed, and in its place, left a silence shaped like compliance. But she didn't fit into that shape anymore, not fully, not cleanly, not quietly. So she started to shrink. Her voice got smaller in the house. Her footsteps are softer. Her presence is quieter. She learned how to disappear without ever leaving. And somewhere in that shrinking, somewhere in the quiet, she stopped being his pride and started becoming his problem. She became the flaw in his record, the wrinkle in his reputation, the reminder that he didn't have full control, and for a man like him, that was the ultimate threat. She kept rehearsing, but only outside the house, took extra shifts at the local bookstore under a fake name so he wouldn't see it on the tax records, used the school library printer to apply for housing. Every move felt like hiding from a man who had memorized her like a schedule. By spring, she had a dorm assignment in New York, a train ticket, a plan. She left a letter on the kitchen counter. "I love you. I need space to think. I'll be back Sunday." Then she left. She expected anger, maybe worry, a few missed calls, and maybe a voicemail asking her to come home. She expected a father who would be mad, but still want her back. She didn't expect to find her suitcase on the porch. She came back on a Sunday, just like she said she would. The train ride home was quiet. Her duffel bag rested in her lap. She stared out the window and imagined the conversation they'd have. Maybe her dad would be waiting at the station. Maybe he'd act cold, but she'd see it. The fear behind his anger. Maybe he'd say, "You scared me, Evelyn." And she'd say, "I know, I'm sorry, but I had to try." She even rehearsed it, whispering the words like a monologue between stops. When the cab dropped her off at the old blue house, something felt off. The porch light was out. It was always on. Always. She walked up slowly, gripping her bag, tried the door. Her key didn't work. She jiggled it and tried again. The lock had been changed. She rang the bell, waited, nothing. She knocked, nothing. She called his phone, straight to voicemail. She called her mom. Also dead, disconnected. That's when she saw it. To the right of the porch swing, in the exact spot where she used to leave muddy sneakers after soccer practice, where she once carved her initials into the armrest with a pocket knife she'd stolen from her cousin. Now there was a suitcase, upright, zip-tight, perfectly aligned, like someone had taken their time, like it mattered to them that her exile be tidy, not thrown, not tossed down the steps, arranged, like a donation, like something no longer needed but too intact to throw away. Beside it, a clear plastic bag. Inside, her birth certificate, her social security card, a copy of her high school transcript, and taped to the outside. A single yellow post-it note, written in a sharp, blocky scrawl. "You made your choice. Good luck." That was it. Not "we love you," but not. "We're disappointed." Not even goodbye. Just transactional closure. As if her entire existence had been filed away, labeled, archived, and now returned like a library book no one wanted to renew. Her hands went cold, not the kind of cold you shake off, the kind that settles into your bones and makes you forget you were ever warm to begin with. She didn't move. She didn't scream, didn't knock again, didn't tear the note in half or throw the suitcase down the street. She just sat on the porch steps. Like maybe if she stayed still long enough, someone would open the door and say, "Wait, we were wrong." But no one did. Neighbors walked past, dogs on leashes, strollers squeaking over sidewalk cracks, and they saw her, and they didn't stop, because they didn't need to ask. They had already heard the version of the story that made them feel better. She sat there until the porch light came on, not because someone turned it on for her, but because it was on a timer. The house didn't even know she was gone, and that was the moment it happened. Not when she left the first time, not on the train to New York, not even when her father refused to answer the phone. Here, this was the moment Evelyn Carter stopped being a daughter and became an echo. Her hands went cold. She sat on the porch steps for hours. At first she told herself it was a mistake. Maybe they were out of town. Maybe this was some twisted punishment. But then the neighbors started walking past, with their dogs, with their stares, with expressions that said, "We know," not curiosity, not concerned, pity, disgust, confirmation. They'd already heard the story, and they believed it. 2 nights later, Evelyn was sleeping on a borrowed couch. She logged into Facebook, and there it was, a post from her aunt, dated the same day she left. Please pray for our family. Evelyn has run away. She left a hateful note. We fear she may be in danger, possibly with an older man. If you see her, contact local authorities." The comments were endless. "So sorry. Praying for you." She always seemed troubled. Kids these days. Such a shame for Richard after everything he's done for her. She stared at the screen until her eyes blurred. He hadn't just locked her out. He'd rewritten her. In the new version, she was unstable, impulsive, rebellious, gone. Within a week, her mother blocked her number. Her drama teacher stopped responding to emails. Her Juilliard acceptance was rescinded. The transcript was marked incomplete. No explanation, no appeal. It wasn't just that she had been abandoned. She had been erased, and no one, not a single person who once called themselves family, ever asked her what happened. The first night, she cried into a hoodie she used as a pillow. By the third, she learned how to cry without sound. She got a job at a 24-hour diner on 6th Street, night shifts, the kind of place with burnt coffee, old men in corner booths, and a jukebox that never worked. No one asked questions. No one cared about swollen eyes or trembling hands. She scrubbed floors, took double shifts, saved every dollar, enrolled in community college under a payment plan. No FAFSA. No support, just her. A second-hand laptop. A bank account that never stayed above $50. And a life she was building with bare hands and borrowed quiet. She told people her parents were back east. Technically true, emotionally. They were dead. What hurt more than the silence was how easy it was. How easy it was for the world to believe she had vanished. No missing posters, no pleas for help, no late-night talk shows with crying mothers. She was gone, and no one even posted a picture. And yet, she survived, little by little. She took acting classes at night, helped with lighting design for off-Broadway shows. She wrote a one-woman show called Inheritance, about a girl erased by her own family. It ran for 3 nights in a black box theater in Brooklyn. Only 10 people came, but one of them was a journalist. 3 months later, Evelyn's name appeared in The New Yorker. What we leave behind when we leave home. The piece didn't mention her father's name, but it didn't have to. 3 days after publication, someone tried to reset the password to her email. She didn't flinch. By then she had her apartment, a circle of friends who knew her real story, a version of herself no longer shaped by lies. But even then, even in that freedom, the silence from home remained the loudest thing in her life. Until the message came, 6 words, from someone she hadn't spoken to since high school. Her cousin, Mia. "I found something. It's about you." The message stayed unread for 2 days. "I found something. It's about you." 6 words from Mia. Her cousin, the family's longtime black sheep. Evelyn stared at the text like it was a ghost, like it might disappear if she looked away too long. They hadn't spoken since she was 17. Back then, Mia had bleach blonde streaks, a rebellious streak, and a long-standing war with curfew. But Mia had stayed in the town, stayed in the family. So when she was the one reaching out, it meant something had cracked. On the 3rd day, Evelyn called. The moment Mia answered, her voice cracked. "I'm sorry, I never reached out. I believed him. We all did." The line went quiet. Then Mia told her what she'd found. She'd been helping her dad, Evelyn's uncle, clean out the attic. Old tax boxes, broken ornaments, a stack of cardboard labeled "junk from Mom's classroom." At the very bottom of one box, inside a plastic Ziploc bag, she found an envelope. Evelyn's handwriting, blue ink, slanted cursive, still faintly smudged in places. The letter. The real one. "I opened it," Mia said. Her voice was shaky on the phone, like she hadn't spoken those words out loud until now. "I wasn't even sure it was yours at first." Of course she wasn't. They'd spent 10 years believing Evelyn had run, had exploded, had become a headline they were too ashamed to read. But when I read it... Her voice broke. Then after a breath, it wasn't angry. It wasn't hateful. It just said you needed space, that you loved them, that you'd be back Sunday. Evelyn didn't speak. She couldn't. Not yet. She just stared out the window of her apartment, the city flickering below, the phone pressed gently to her cheek like it was something sacred, because those were her words. She remembered them. The exact phrasing, the careful curve of her L's, the smudge where her hand had trembled writing "I'll be back." And yet, for 10 years she had questioned her memory, had doubted herself in the darkest corners of 2:22 a.m., had whispered, "Maybe I was more dramatic than I thought. Maybe I did sound angry. Maybe I don't remember it right." But Mia had read it, and said it back to her, exactly, like a gospel finally spoken aloud in the temple it was written for. For the first time in a decade, Evelyn didn't feel crazy, didn't feel invisible. She felt confirmed, not forgiven, not justified, just real. Mia kept talking. It wasn't even folded like it had been read, like he never showed it to anyone, just packed it away, sealed it like something shameful, and then he made up a version that made him the victim. They say Evelyn closed her eyes. The weight of that hit was different than anything else, because hiding the letter was one thing, but rewriting the story, that was intentional. That was surgical. That was how you make the world forget someone exists while they're still breathing. Mia sent her a photo that night, the envelope, the handwriting, the words, printed, scanned, digital, sonore, but still so achingly hers. Evelyn stared at the screen for hours, not reading the words, just tracing them with her eyes, over and over, until it finally landed. I didn't disappear. I was hidden. And now, found. Mia confronted her dad. He played it off. "Oh, that old thing?" But his face said everything. He knew. They all did. That night, Mia scanned the letter and emailed it to her. Evelyn opened the file with trembling hands, zoomed in on the handwriting, the creases, the date, the words. Her words. The version of herself she thought had been lost. She printed it, smoothed it flat, stared at it for a long time. It felt like holding a piece of her history, like finding the missing heartbeat in a story that was never hers to begin with. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't unstable. She hadn't disappeared. She had disappeared. She didn't cry. Not this time. Something colder settled into her bones. Not anger, not sadness, precision. 2 weeks later, the retirement party invite hit social media. Big celebration. School board, staff, families, local officials. A tribute to 40 years of excellence. Photos of Richard Carter shaking hands, mentoring teens, speaking at conferences. A man who had shaped thousands of lives. She didn't cry when she saw it, didn't scream. She just looked down at the letter and thought, "You buried the truth. I'm going to dig it up in front of everyone." At first, she wasn't sure. The letter sat on her desk for a week, right beside a cup of coffee she never drank. A candle burned to the wick. Every time she looked at it, the silence echoed louder. The birthdays were missed. The college student never attended. The friends who believed the Facebook version. She didn't want revenge. She wanted recognition. Not from him, but from the story itself. And then she saw it. The RSVP form, posted on the school district's website. Join us in celebrating Principal Richard Carter's legacy. Family welcome. That word, family. It felt like a challenge, so she entered her name, E. Elaine Carter. Her middle name, one guest, no +1, no meal preference. She didn't need backup. She had the truth. She booked a flight, borrowed a black blazer from a friend, packed exactly 2 things. A printed copy of the real letter, a clipping of the New Yorker article with her name in bold font. She didn't rehearse a speech, didn't plan a scene. This wasn't theater. It was the closing scene of someone else's narrative. She wasn't going to scream, wasn't going to cry. She was going to walk in, look him in the eye, and let the silence finally speak for itself. 2 hours before the gala, she stood on the same porch. Same cracked step beneath her boots, same peeling blue paint on the railing, same wind, carrying the faint scent of someone else's dinner down the street. 10 years. It had been 10 years since she stood here with shaking hands and a letter in her pocket. That night, no one answered. Tonight, she wasn't sure she wanted them to. But she rang the bells anyway. The door creaked open slowly, not wide, not welcoming, just enough to remind Evelyn it still existed. Her mother stood there, older, thinner, grayer than memory allowed. A sweater hung off her shoulders like it had grown too heavy to carry. Her collarbones were more prominent than before, her hair pulled back in a loose bun like she hadn't had the energy or reason to care in a long time. Her frame had folded inward, not from age, from weight. The weight of years unsaid, and then the eyes. Those same eyes Evelyn used to look for in crowded auditoriums, the ones that used to sparkle with encouragement, even if it was practiced, even if it came a second too late. Now, they looked like porcelain, still, fragile, stored too long in a place with no sunlight. She stared at Evelyn for what felt like forever. And then, "Evelyn," she whispered, not as a greeting, as a wound reopening, like the name had to be pulled from somewhere deep inside her, dust-covered and bruised, where it had been hidden on purpose. It didn't sound like a reunion. That sounded like regret given shape. It wasn't "you're back." It wasn't "my God." It wasn't even "I'm sorry." It was just a name, spoken with the brittle breath of a woman who'd learned how to live without speaking it aloud. For a moment, Evelyn didn't move, didn't reply. She just stood on that porch, watching the woman who once made her birthday cakes from scratch now look at her like a ghost who'd come home with unfinished business. And in that flicker of recognition, there was something else. Not love, not shocking, but something older, something deeper. Guilt. Evelyn said nothing at first, then quietly, "Did you know?" The question hovered between them, not what she meant. If? Her mother didn't ask for clarification. She didn't need to. She stepped outside, pulling her cardigan tight around her body, and sat on the porch swing. Evelyn remained standing. "I found the letter," she said. "The real one. The one I left. The one he hid." Her mother closed her eyes, a slow, silent nod. "I wanted to come after you," she said finally. "I did." "Then why didn't you?" She didn't raise her voice, didn't cry, just asked. Her mother stared out toward the street as if the answer might pass by on the wind. "He said you were unstable, that you'd run off with an older man, that you were angry, dangerous, that we needed to protect ourselves. He said, if I reached out, I would only make things worse." "And you believed him?" Her mother's voice barely rose above the breeze. "I believed him, because I was afraid of him too." The words didn't hit like bullets. They landed like ash. No heat, no pain, just dust settling on everything Evelyn used to believe. She looked at her mother, the woman who once braided her hair, who clapped too loud at her recitals, who smelled like lavender and cheap laundry soap, and saw something more fragile than she'd prepared for. She wasn't the villain, but she wasn't innocent either. She was the silence that let everything else stick. Evelyn didn't argue. There was nothing left to fight for. The door had closed 10 years ago, and though it stood open now, it no longer led anywhere she wanted to go. She turned to leave. Her mother didn't stop her. Didn't say, "I'm sorry," didn't say, "Come back." Just sat there, shrinking into the swing. And Evelyn realized she'd spent years trying to get someone to open a door, but she had built her own house now, her keys, her name, and this place? It was just a porch, just a door, no longer a home. The ballroom smelled like money and memories. Champagne flutes clinked under chandeliers. Waiters passed canapes on silver trays. The jazz band played something safe. Cole Porter, maybe. Nostalgia dressed in satin. Banners lined the walls. Celebrating Principal Richard Carter, a legacy of excellence. Photos from decades past flickered across a projector screen. Science fairs, award ceremonies, graduation smiles, handshake after handshake, student after student, a carefully curated collage of a man they all believed they knew. She stood in the back, not near the wine, not near the smiling families snapping photos beneath the banner, not near the podium where his legacy had been gift-wrapped in gold letters and floral arrangements, just far enough to watch, just close enough to feel it, the hum of the room, the small talk and silverware clinks, the safe laughter of people who believed they were in the presence of someone good. No one noticed her yet, and that was perfect, because for once she didn't want to be seen until she chose it, until the truth was ready to breathe. She could smell the champagne now, could hear the jazz band winding down to their final refrain, notes spilling like expensive perfume across the marble floor. Every detail so precisely placed, like the man they were all here to honor. Even the air conditioning seemed to be humming in his key. He hadn't seen her yet. She could see him, though, at the far end of the room, holding court like a politician, shaking hands, laughing, telling stories he'd probably told 100 times before. He looked taller than she remembered, or maybe just more polished. Years of power had hardened him into something statuesque, but she knew better. She'd seen the cracks long before anyone else had. She let her fingers graze the folded envelope in her coat pocket, felt the paper's edge, soft but certain, like it had waited just as long as she had. She scanned the room again. Faces from a former life, Teachers, neighbors, family friends, people who had once clapped at her spelling bee wins and dropped off lasagnas during flu season. Not one of them had asked where she went. Not one had thought to ask why. They just believed what they were told, that she'd left, that she'd run. She took a slow breath, held it in the base of her spine, because once she stepped forward, she wouldn't belong to the shadows anymore. Once she moved, the version of the story they held would start to unravel, and she needed this moment to be whole, before everything shattered, before gasps, before the photo flashed on Mia's phone, before her father's jaw would lock in panic, before the lie they'd wrapped in polite silence began to rot right there on the ballroom floor. So she stood still, one last second, one last inhale, then stepped forward. They called his name. 40 years of service. A mentor to thousands. A pillar of this community. A father figure to more students than we can count. He walked on stage in a tailored navy suit, posture proud, hair still crisply parted like he was 20 years younger. The applause rolled like thunder. Even the mayor stood. He smiled like a man untouched, unchallenged, unquestioned. She waited. Waited for the noise to settle. Waited for the smilers to turn back to their tables. Then one step. Another. The click of her heels echoed more loudly than the applause ever did. People turned, first in curiosity, then in recognition, then in a kind of silent, collective realization. She saw it spread across the room like a wave. Whispers, eyebrows raised, a hand over a mouth, and then him. His smile froze mid-expression. The mask slipped just enough for her to see the man beneath it, the one who'd signed off on her erasure. She reached the front. No panic, no shaking, just precision. He leaned toward her. Evelyn. Not here. She stepped up to the microphone. Hi, she said. I'm Evelyn Carter, his daughter. The room went still. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness where even the air seems to hold its breath. I haven't been in this room or this town in 10 years, she said. 10 years ago, my father told you I ran away, that I was angry, that I disowned him, that I left a hateful note. She reached into her coat, pulled out the envelope, held it like an artifact. This is that note. She unfolded it slowly, letting the paper speak before she even read a word. It says, I love you. I need space. I'll be back Sunday. A pause. Then she looked up at the crowd. Teachers, former classmates, board members, people who once brought her casseroles after recitals. Does that sound like someone who ran away? Silence. The kind that settles into bones. That makes people shift in their seats. That forces truth into the corners of a room too used to smiling politely. A few people looked at him. One woman covered her mouth. He stepped forward, voice low and cracking. Evelyn, that's not the full story. She raised a hand. Don't. You've told your story for 10 years. This is mine. A voice from the back. Is that why she vanished? Another. I remember praying for her. And then Mia stood, holding up her phone, displaying the scan of the original letter. He hid it, she said loud and clear. For 10 years he let us believe something that wasn't true. The unraveling began. She didn't even have to pull the thread. It pulled itself. Someone whispered, What else did he lie about? Another teacher stood. Mrs. Blake, the former vice principal. I always wondered why you shut down the theater program so suddenly. A man near the bar, an old guidance counselor. You told us she had a breakdown. That she was unstable. He looked stunned, pale. His hands trembled slightly. The mask had fallen, and there was no script left to follow. Even the superintendent, who had toasted him just 20 minutes earlier, stepped away from the podium. His smile gone, his arms folded, then someone loudly from near the doors. You made her disappear to protect your image. Richard Carter didn't speak. He looked out at the room, at the legacy he had built not from brick or truth, but from borrowed belief. And belief once cracked doesn't hold. He stepped back from the microphone. No apology, no defense, just retreat. The slideshow kept playing behind him, photos of perfect moments, of kids he shook hands with, of a man the town thought they knew. But no one was watching anymore. The story had changed. And so had the man. She didn't stay for cake. Didn't wait for the polite speeches to resume. Didn't look back to see how her father was explaining it all, if he even tried. There were still clinking forks, yes, still half-hearted sips of champagne, but the room no longer held applause. Only whispers. Only the sound of certainty cracking. Evelyn slipped out the side exit the same way she'd entered the story that night, quietly, without permission. But this time, not hidden. This time she didn't need an invitation. The hotel doors hissed closed behind her. The air outside kissed her skin with a kind of clean that only comes after a storm. Not cold, not punishing, just honest. The sky was a deep, dignified navy. Stars scattered wide, not in some dramatic swirl, but in soft points of light, like truth too far to reach, but still visible. She stood still for a moment, let the hum of the city wrap around her like a second skin, and then she exhaled. A long, slow breath. From a place buried so deep inside her chest, she forgot it had been waiting. It wasn't relief, it wasn't triumph. It was something quieter, something earned. The kind of exhale that says you don't have to hold your name in your mouth like glass anymore. Inside, they would clear the tables, fold the linens, delete her from the official event recap. But outside, under the sky, she remained. Not as an interruption, not as a scandal, not as the girl who ran away, but as the woman who came back and told the truth. She stood alone for a few minutes on the curb, clutching the now folded letter in one hand like a talisman. The crowd inside was still murmuring behind the thick glass walls of the Hilton ballroom. It sounded like a funeral. Not of a man, of a myth. Mia found her a few minutes later. She didn't say anything at first, just came up beside her and stood silently. Two women, side by side in borrowed heels and stubborn truth. Finally Mia spoke. "You were brave." Evelyn didn't smile, didn't nod, just said softly, "No. I was overdue." They stood like that for a while, neither speaking, neither needing to. There was something sacred in the quiet between them. Not silence, but space reclaimed. Then Evelyn said it, more to the night than to anyone else. "I think I spent years just wanting someone to believe me." She paused, then shook her head. "But it wasn't belief I needed. It was for the silence to stop." Mia nodded. "You ended it." Evelyn looked down at the letter, edges worn from being held too tightly for too long. "No," she said. "I reclaimed it." She hadn't needed her father to read it. He'd already heard every word, and now so had everyone else, and that mattered more than any confrontation ever could. As they walked away from the hotel and into the night, Evelyn felt no vindication, no triumph. What she felt was quieter, heavier, stronger, peace. Not because she won, but because she was no longer waiting to be invited back into a story that was never written for her. The story wasn't his anymore. It was hers. She didn't walk away as an exile. She walked away as a woman, no longer erased, no longer silent, just true.